Alright, this is a makeup video because today for the Bible study we had the computer working, the live stream began, and then it decided to die in the middle of the time, and we didn't have a chance to turn it back on. I know these are never as good, they're a little bit different, they have a different flavor, there aren't other people in the room, it's not as natural of a conversation, but we'll do our best. It is a chance to walk through the scripture passages that we talked about today at the beginning of our study. And so we begin at the end of chapter 11. There's a couple of verses, and it notes that the Passover of the Jews is near, and Jesus is going toward Jerusalem. He stops in the city of Bethany. It's right on the other side of the Mount of Olives, a couple miles from Jerusalem. It's close by. And it says he's doing this 6 days before Passover. One of the things that we need to stop and remember is what happened at Passover. Because there's details like this in the scriptures that are small, and we read past them without thinking about them very much. But the truth is that there's actually a whole bunch of things that it tells us, that it was Passover. One of the things that you have in Passover is a whole bunch of lambs. Because Passover is a covenant feast that every family who's in Jerusalem, every family in Israel, needs a lamb that they kill in a ritual way, and they offer to the Lord, and then they take the flesh of the lamb and they cook it, they roast it, and then they consume it. Passover was one of the pilgrimage festivals of the Jewish year, and so men and boys who were over age 12 were expected to be there as long as they could afford it. At least that seems to be the way it was, and they would come. Many women and children came too, especially among those families who were devout or those families who could afford it. So there were thousands, maybe even 1 million people around Jerusalem. And if each family needs a lamb, if each family needs one of these, or you could share with a few other people, it meant that there were a lot of lambs that were needed. So there was a bunch of noise. There's a bunch of farm animals probably walking around. It's probably a bit dusty and dirty, because ancient cities were. It was crowded. There were people on the streets. Jerusalem, we think, was a city of about 50,000 people in the time of Jesus, for the most part. If it swelled to 1 million at this point, it would be like every nook and cranny of the city was occupied. Every blank space on your lawn or place in your courtyard would probably have someone sleeping on it, because so many people came. Maybe some people rented out their homes. People probably came for different reasons, and this we're going to encounter in the story. It is so important to remember that there isn't one monolithic group that's just over there. It's like a giant rock and they always do the same thing. There were groups of people in Jerusalem. Some of them are coming for Passover because they're religious and they want to be there. They want to honor the Lord. They know that this is part of the covenant, so they come out of devotion. That group may be somewhat small, but we don't know. It could be relatively large. There were groups of Romans, because this was a time of unrest. Many of the revolutions that happened in Judea against the Romans and at other times in their history happened at times of festivals. So there were extra garrisons brought in. Soldiers would guard the Praetorium, which was over near the Temple Mount, so that they could keep an eye on things. There's tension in the air. Some people probably came for economic opportunities. We had the religious and the devoted. There's the Roman soldiers. There's the people that are coming for economy. They may be devoted too. They're not all bad. We have to be careful about demonizing them, because many of them were probably just trying to make a living. But when you have 1 million people show up somewhere, you definitely are going to have traders and people who come with goods to sell. Whether they're good-natured or bad-natured, whether they're just trying to make a living or they're taking advantage of people, there were likely lots of tradespeople around, people selling their wares. So you have the animals and the herders, you have the people that are coming out of devotion, you have the citizens, you have the Romans, you have the Pharisees and the Jewish leadership. And they're looking at this entire event through a political lens. They want to fight against the Romans, they want to work against the Romans. Many of them were supposed to be the religious leadership of the time. But you can see and will feel in the story that they've lost their way a little bit, that they're not always leading religiously, that many of the decisions they make, many of the decisions they take are political. They want to kill Jesus because they say that everyone is going after him, and the Romans are going to come and destroy their city and destroy the temple and wipe out the nation. So sadly, Jesus dies, they kill Jesus, and the Romans come after a revolution of the Jewish people about 40 years later, and they destroy the city, and they kill their children, and the temple is destroyed. That happens later. But at the beginning, they're here for the season of Passover, and it's just important to remember that this was the kind of situation, the mise en scène, I think they call it in literature. This is how it feels. This is what it was like. People with eager anticipation as well. Some of them are asking, where is Jesus? Is he here? He must have been teaching before. He was a public figure. And you have to remember that he's coming from a great event. Lazarus was just raised from the dead. And despite their wonderings, despite the fact that not all of them follow him and some of them are pretty curious, you can't get past the fact that Lazarus was raised from the dead, that he was dead. He was in a tomb, he was 4 days, he was smelly, he was covered in clothes, and Jesus raised him from the dead. And so there's this foment. They're talking about it, they're noticing. They may have heard his teachings in the past. He's been in and out of Jerusalem for a while in the Gospel of John. He said some very provocative things, some very beautiful things, but things that would make you think if you didn't believe in him. So there's people there and they're wondering where he is. And in this case, he's going to come. But he doesn't do it right away. Passover is all about the covenant. This is a covenant meal. It's a ritual meal. The people celebrate. They take unleavened bread and wine and a paschal lamb. Those are the major pieces. There's other food that they eat, but those are the major things. It's a meal where you celebrate the covenant of God with his people. They are the people of God. They are chosen. They are called into a relationship with him. They're people who are called to leave Egypt behind, to leave the land of sin and slavery and enter the promised land and enter this place of grace where God is calling them, where he is leading them. But before this happens, Jesus is further away. He is in the town of Bethany, in the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And this is something important. This is something that is mentioned. It's 6 days before. So 6 days before Passover, he's with Mary and Martha. And again, I think it's good to put the context back in this. If it's 6 days before and he dies on a Friday, then this is likely on a Saturday, and Saturday is the Sabbath. Maybe it's on a Friday night. It depends a little bit on how they counted days and what the gospel writer is trying to say. But it very well feels like a ritual meal and the Sabbath. Jesus has this kind of tender, quiet moment before he launches into his Passion Week with some people who are close to him. He's at the house of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Now remember that it says Lazarus was there. Lazarus was raised from the dead. And it's kind of like, it's easy to think of him about as raised from the dead. Oh, okay, Lazarus is raised from the dead. We can believe that. But remember that he was still around. You know, Jesus raised him from the dead, and now he's eating a Sabbath meal with him, and like Lazarus is sitting across a table from Jesus. That's got to be different. Like, what do you say to the person that raised you from the dead? What do you ask? What do you talk about? What does Jesus think about? That is an important place for us to stop and to pray. It's a Sabbath meal. This is happening. Maybe it was a smaller meal, a gathering of friends. Jesus is there. And Lazarus is too, and his disciples. And Lazarus and Jesus have this encounter again. We talked a lot in our class about the dead who hear the voice of God and live. Now this man is sitting here around this meal knowing that he was dead and he lives because of this one. Because of the person sitting with him. That has to be a pretty special thing. Then later in the meal, or at some point, Mary, the sister of Lazarus, takes a jar of perfume. It's pure nard, I think it says. One of the tough things is that we don't know exactly what it is. There is this complicated field of study that tries to figure out all these different things and plants in the Bible and oils and anointments, precious gemstones, and it's really, really hard because we know that some of them, the names have changed over the years. We suspect that some plants they may have had back then we don't have now. Some things grew there and don't grow there now. It's very, very difficult to say. And we have some good guesses, that's true. But I don't think that we can say exactly what this jar of perfume was. We know that it was something quite expensive. There is an extravagance to this scene that is significant. The scriptures say 300 days' wages. 300 denarii, it's a Roman coin, it was a day's wage for a laborer. And I think we have to put this in a different context because it's too easy, 300 days' wages. Like, have you ever spent 80% of a year's salary on something in your life? Maybe if you bought a house, maybe if you bought an expensive car, right? But these kind of things we don't do in an ordinary basis. Mary takes one jar of perfume and breaks it and uses it to anoint the feet of Jesus. There's an extravagance to this. If you thought of someone who made, $80,000 a year, this is 10, 12, 5/6. So probably close to 80%, 85% of a year's salary. Maybe this jar costs $20,000 or $30,000 in the modern world. It's important to get a sense of the extravagance of the gift because there's more at work in this scene than at first appears. 6 days before, it's a Sabbath meal, it's quiet, it's tender, Jesus is with some friends, they're celebrating, they're praying, he has this encounter with Lazarus. It has to be a beautiful scene, and yet I wonder if it's bittersweet for him. Mary takes this bottle of perfume and breaks it. It's expensive. It costs a lot of money. And she wants to give it all to Jesus. She's given Jesus her best. Not just a little bit, not just good enough. She's not asking, what can I do to get in? She's giving Jesus, in a sense, everything that she has. Martha is busy serving, and we don't know. My suspicion is that Martha, after her encounter with Jesus in the last chapter, she really had some great lines and some beautiful moments where Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life, and she professed her belief, and she encountered the Lord. I believe that you are the one who is coming into the world. She knows Jesus. Maybe now in serving other people, she's also serving him. So she kind of takes a back seat in the story. This story isn't about her. This story is about Mary. And she takes this jar of perfumed oil. She anoints the feet of Jesus. And it talks about the fragrance of the oil filling the house where they are. Now, fragrance is something that should clue us in because it's kind of a weird detail. Like, okay, she anointed the feet of Jesus, and it specifically mentions the fragrance. Well, if you look back in the Old Testament, what you'll find is that fragrance is used for the offerings. Like the burnt offerings on the altar in the temple are a fragrant offering to the Lord, something that he smells. That's kind of the image that the Old Testament uses. The incense that's burned in the temple forms a cloud, an image of things from Mount Sinai, and God guiding the people with his presence. But it also mentions the fragrance of the incense, that this fills the temple. It's a pleasing aroma. So when it talks about the fragrance of this nard filling the room where they are, it has a liturgical sense. It has a sense of worship, that Mary is being extravagant in her worship. And it sets up this almost immediate contrast because into the midst of this comes Judas. Judas who says, why wasn't this sold and the money given to the poor? This is a temptation we hear so often. People will ask, well, why should we build nice churches? We should give that money to the poor. Part of it, I would say, is that people who build nice churches prove their generosity and usually are extremely generous to the poor. But there's something else here. Jesus rebukes Judas. He's looking at things in a worldly sense and saying, hey, there's all this money. It tells us in the background too that he's a thief, that he didn't want the money for the poor, that he wanted the money for himself, that he's caught up in his own sin. This is probably a moment of tension. The other disciples in the room and Jesus probably feel the tension. Maybe Mary and Martha and Lazarus do too. because it's this tender scene. Mary's anointing the feet of Jesus. Maybe it's a Sabbath meal. It's quiet. They're talking about the covenant. Maybe they're spending time in prayer. And now there's a moment of tension. It's like the cat ran on the piano and hit all the keys at the same time, and there's a shocking chord. Something's wrong. And in this case, Jesus rebukes Judas. He shuts down this line of reasoning, saying, "You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. She has anointed my body for burial." Mary's deed is remembered. Mary's deed is treasured. Mary's deed is precious. That is a beautiful thing. And Judas missed it. He was not there. He didn't have the right idea, didn't have the right plan. He missed it. That's something important. It's not just secondary. It's not just out there. That he was thinking in a worldly sense. He was going after things in this world. This is a problem we face all the time. We can look at material goods and say, well, why wasn't this done for the poor? And sometimes it doesn't mean we have to have churches made out of solid gold. But something about giving God our best sets things in the right order. That we should strive to live first for Him. That in our finances, in the way that we handle money, God should be first. He should be the priority. In our time, God should be first. He should be the priority, not everything else. In the way that we treat other people, we should look at them as God does. First and foremost, to see them as His children, to see them as people that Jesus Christ has suffered and died for. This is all about setting our priorities in right order. So you have this kind of crazy contrast because the Pharisees and the people were trying to kill Jesus and have Him arrested. They're throwing people out of synagogues. They're looking at things politically. They're worried about His movement spreading. They're hostile. You have the crowd who's curious. They're asking questions. They've seen some of the miracles of Jesus, but they don't understand. Maybe they want to see another miracle. Maybe they're looking for the spectacle. Maybe it's gossip. Maybe it's genuine. You have the Roman soldiers. They probably just want to keep peace. Some of them feel like they're doing their job. Some of them were probably racist and hated the Jews. All of that is part of the mix. You have the apostles and Mary and Lazarus and Martha and this tender scene of beauty. And then you have Judas, and you can see him outside the community. You can see him outside the group. I don't think that's a good sign. I think it's saying something about it, that something about his heart and the way that he was thinking about things already wasn't in the right place. He's moving in the wrong direction, and Jesus tries to put a stop to it. Someone asked this morning, if Judas was a thief, why did they leave him the money bag? And the best answer I can give is, I don't know. I have wondered that myself again and again. Why would you give a thief the money bag? And some of it, when we're trying to solve problems like that, I think it's good to remember, to have in our minds that Jesus doesn't do dumb things. That He does things with a purpose, He does things for a reason. He's always working for the best and working for the salvation of those who love Him. We have to choose it. And so maybe Judas was the money person because Jesus thought his contact with money would lead him in the right direction. Maybe there was a possibility. Maybe he was faced with this kind of choice. We know that he ends up choosing badly and regretting it. But you have Judas in the story. You have Mary Magdalene. She wipes the feet of the Lord with her hair. This is another kind of awkward gesture. It's hard to imagine. Why would you wipe someone's feet with your hair? And again, I don't know. It could be that she recognized His holiness, that she just wanted a part of Him. Sometimes people do things like that. It could be the extravagance of a gesture, that she's so caught up in love, she's so overwhelmed by emotion and carried toward Jesus that she's willing to do anything she can to be with Him. But it's this moment of tenderness. Maybe He reaches down and looks into her eyes. Maybe He holds her hand and picks her and lifts her up. She's the only one who does this. It's not the rest of the apostles, it's her. So there's something beautiful about that. In Judas, corruption is already seeped in. He's going in the wrong direction. Jesus is trying to change his mind. He's trying to bring him to reality. He's trying to show him that this way is wrong. But He won't stop him. He doesn't stop us. That we have freedom and we have to learn how to use it well. But Judas is doing this. He is like a thief. He's the opponent of the Good Shepherd. And when you look at a story like this, you might find that you were Mary in the story, and you have this extravagant thing for Jesus. You're spending time. There's this moment of tenderness. There's this gift and His grace that He's affirming. Maybe you find yourself being Judas in the story, wondering why, wondering how, looking at things in this world. It's not a bad place to be. Maybe you're the Pharisees, thinking about a political situation instead of the religious one. Again, we have to be careful that assuming all these people are immediately wrong, and I don't want to be like Judas, and I don't want to be like the Pharisees. Well, it's true. We don't want to be like them in the end. But if we're like them in the beginning, and we're ready to admit it, that can be a place where we encounter Jesus. That can be a place where we hear His voice speaking to us. If we're not ready to admit it, if we can't see ourselves in anyone but like some rock on the ground and stone that's observing, then usually it's a sign that we're not really entering into it. That's part of the invitation. What is it like to look into the eyes of Jesus? What is it like for Him to see you? What is it like for Him to praise your gestures and extravagance of love? What is it like for Him to rebuke you and say, no, this is the wrong path. You should stop. You deserve better than this. You're made for more than this. You're made for me. You're made for eternal life. Sometimes it might be like that. Sometimes we might be like the Pharisees and thinking about things from the outside. Sometimes we might be like the crowd outside the house that's trying to catch a glimpse of Lazarus. They know that he was dead. They know that he's raised. Those are important things. When you're in a story, the goal of our Bible study is to take these passages and help them open, to help you be able to look at it and see and hear the voice of God speaking to you. Maybe this is one of the passages that does it. You might pray with it 1,000 times and find out that you're a different person every time. That's okay. But if you pray with it 1,000 times, what I can guarantee you is you will encounter Jesus. This is a beautiful scene. There's so many contrasts and so many stories and so many places about this. The tender moment of the apostles and Jesus at this meal, the scheming of the Pharisees, maybe at the same time in the temple, to stop Jesus, to thwart His action, to prevent His work. They're afraid. They're lost. There's the Romans who probably don't care. They're wondering who this preacher is. And there's everyone in between. We can put ourselves there. You can put yourself there. You can close your eyes and imagine it, the dust and the people and the noise and the conflict and the controversy and the tension, and the tenderness and the beauty and the goodness. We all need that. It's a chance for us to take a step back from the hustle and bustle of our lives and to look for the kingdom of heaven, to look for the beauty of God, to look for what He is doing, and to respond to it in love with all of our hearts. This is an invitation to us in this chapter. It's an invitation for Lent. It's an invitation for the rest of our lives to find Jesus, to hear His voice. Hopefully in the details of this kind of story, you discover something that resonates with you, something that speaks to your hearts. It's a great time to search for who Jesus is. Who is He to me? Where are my priorities? Where are things set? The people were here and they were purifying themselves. They were going in these baths to become ritually clean. That's a part of Judaism as well. When we look at all of these different things, we have to be careful of our own assumptions, because what happens is we're often reading things into a story that don't belong there. We forget Jesus lives in a world without air conditioning. He doesn't have light switches. They don't stay up late at night because it got dark outside. In general, at least people didn't. There's all kinds of pieces like this. And the climate was very different. It's a hot climate. It's warm. You don't have a struggle to keep warm. North Dakota, where we are right now, is in the winter, and it's cold. And so we think of being warm as something that you have to strive for and something that you have to work at. When you live closer to the equator, you don't. You work at being cold. You work at being cool. They were probably much more in line with that. We have to be careful that when we're reading the story, we don't start trying to put winter coats on people because they didn't have them. They didn't wear them. It wasn't that kind of region. It was a much, much warmer region for most of the year. So it would be far more likely to have longer flowing robes, because when clothing is away from your skin, it's not as hot. and it helps protect you from the sun because the sun would be warm. It's not a cold culture. We have to be careful of that assumption. There's lots of other ones that we bring into it about reading and books and desires and the scientific mindset and on and on and on. And these are biases on our part. Not that all biases are wicked or intentional, but they're just biases. We should recognize that we are biased, that we have these predispositions to think about things in a certain way. Some of that is good, and some of that is really, really helpful to read things and to encounter things from a different perspective. Because otherwise, we could start thinking that the gospel is written to our world today, that they go together neatly, and they don't. The gospel was written to us as words of God and words of grace, but it's also contextual. It's written in a time and a history, and we have to remember that. We don't think of homes as having animals in them, and as nearly as we can tell, almost all of the homes in ancient Israel did, even those of the very wealthy. Homes weren't as large. They were different. They had a courtyard around a fire outside and some rooms around the sides, usually a gate in a wall that protected the courtyard that let people in and out. We don't have homes like that in North Dakota, certainly. So when we think of it in Lazarus and hosting people, remember that. Remember that it's different. It exposes part of who we are in the direction that we read the story from. And that can be good, but we don't want that to be the only direction we read the story from. Because it's one perspective among many others, and there's a greater truth. It doesn't mean throwing out the baby with the bathwater, that we don't have anything to learn. It's just a different world, a different time, a different place. Jesus was okay with that. We can be too. And if we learn to see some of these biases and assumptions and how we're thinking about things, sometimes we can move out of them before they become an issue. Sometimes we can say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that probably wasn't that cold. It was more likely warm, and they were trying to be cool. And it can help give us an insight into the story. We can look at many more passages. We will dive into chapter 12 more next week. Hopefully our live stream works again. This is kind of annoying when you have to make a second video. But at least we covered the same material. Most of it's here. It's probably not as good. But it is a chance to reflect on the scriptures with you. And my hope is that by doing this, you have a chance to encounter Christ. You have a chance to hear Him speaking to you. My hope is that it opens up these passages as places to pray. Places where you can sit in your heart and say, Jesus, come to me. Where through this encounter with Him, your life can be transformed. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're striving for. That's what every moment of this is about. So God bless you, and thanks for tuning in.